Research, Design and Classification of Data by Jake Robinson. Research designs. There are three types of research designs: repeated measures, independent groups, and matched pairs. Repeated measures is research which is used with the same type of people. They perform the same performance under different conditions. An example of this would be a class of sports science students. Independent groups. This research uses two different types of people. Different groups of people participate in levels of IV or conditions. An example of this would be a sports science class and an English class. Matched pairs. This is where people have the same characteristics. So an example of this would be a first year sports science class and a second year sports science class. Experimental research designs. There are five types of experimental research designs: experimental, cross-sectional, case study, longitudinal, and comparative. Experimental looks at the effects of an independent variable on a dependent variable. To understand this, you need to know these two terms, independent and dependent variables. The independent variable affects the dependent variable. An example of this would be if the athlete had a high amount of power in their hamstring, it will allow them to kick the ball harder and create more power within the strike. Cross-sectional. This uses a range of participants who come from different backgrounds, ages and genders from the overall population. So an example of this would be if they wanted to see who plays more football between girls and boys, or who plays more netball between girls and boys. Case study. You investigate a particular phenomenon over a period of time. This takes into account the development of the area of investigation over time and the environment. So an example of this would be to investigate the psychological reasons that an athlete has when injured. So, yeah. Longitudinal. This involves measuring the same variables over a long period of time. This also requires a greater resource than other types of research. This research is helpful when you want to examine the characteristics of a group of people, such as a football team. So an example of this would be when you investigate a group of young talented footballers or basketball players. Comparative. This is where the researcher compares two or more things of discovering one thing about one or all of them. An example of this would be if you were to get the opinions of girls and boys on the issue of male footballers get paid more money each week compared to women footballers. Research sources. There are two types: primary data collection and secondary data. Primary data collection is data and research you have collected by yourself, and secondary data is data which is published by other people, such as on books and websites and journals. Classifications of data. There are six different types of data: discrete, nominal data, ordinal data, continuous data, and then there's two types of continuous interval and continuous ratio. So discrete data is a form of data where only separate, isolated or opposite values can be achieved. So this is a yes or no answer, such as if you are male or female. Nominal data is where the participants are put into categories. This type of data is known as frequency data. This has a wider range of data. An example of this would be shoe size. Ordinal data. This data is ranked in ascending order. However, this doesn't tell you the gaps in between each rank. So an example of this would be a group in height order going from tallest to smallest. continuous data. This type of data can have any numerical data. It is also specific data. An example of this would be a long distance lap times, such as a marathon. Continuous interval data. This data has equal intervals. This data hasn't got a limit. An example of this would be temperature, because you can have a minus temperature and a positive temperature. Continuous ratio data. This data has relative equal units of measurements. This data also starts from 0 and increases, so it can't have any negative scores like the temperature. So an example of this would be a heart rate monitor. It starts from 0 and goes up. So this data table shows us all the different types of data involved in it. So if we look at the sprint, this column is ordinal data. This is because it has been ranked from the shortest time to the biggest time. So then if we go to standing wall jump, this column is continuous, and this would be ratio, as the data is numerical and there are equal intervals between the data. Height, this column is also ratio continuous data, as the data is numerical. Smokers / non-smoker, this column is discrete, because it's either one or the other, so you either smoke or you don't smoke. The sit and reach, this column is nominal data. This is because the data has been categorized. Weight change, this column is interval data. This is because the data has gone below 0, so it's gone to a minus value in here. Sex, this column is discrete. This is either because it's one or the other, so it's male or female. And age is continuous ratio data, as the data is numerical, the same as standing wall jump and height. So in task 2, there's notational analysis and observations. So notational analysis is used by sports scientists to collect objective data on the performance of athletes. You can observe tactics, technique, individual movement and work rate. So an example of this would be a coach watching a basketball player and seeing all of the actions he does in the game, such as how many points scores, dribbles completed and not completed. The advantages of notational analysis are you can compare the player's performance in all of the games he has played in, so you can look at each results from game to game and see if he's improved or got worse. The analysis shows you what they have improved on, so their strongest areas. The analysis shows us all of the parts of the game the players are involved in, such as rebounds and points scored. However, the disadvantage is it is hard to observe all of the parts of the game, such as in basketball it is very fast. You can't note down a dribble, and when you're noting down the dribble, the player might pass it straight away and you might miss the pass, so you might not get all the actions the player does. Also, it can be demoralizing comparing a player's performance. If you don't know the sport, you won't understand and know all the parts of the game. So observational is when a coach observes the player, he is scouting in a particular sport. When recording observational data, there are two types: qualitative and quantitative. Qualitative involves descriptive notes and reflective notes. Quantitative involves observational checklists and time sampling. So the advantages of this can be imitated and not rely on recall, and identified behaviours not chosen to disclose. However, the disadvantage is subject tries to please the researcher. and this is the Hawthorne effect, which participants act differently because they know they've been watched, so they try harder during games. Task 3, qualitative data. There are 4 types of interview structures: structured, unstructured, semi-structured, and focus group. So structured, this is where there are set interview questions thought about before the interview, and the interviewer will ask those questions. The interview is also quite rigid. So the advantages, the interviewer will flow as there are a lot of questions. In Also, the interviewer is in control of the interview because they have made the questions, and it is also simple as the questions have been prepared, and you don't have to think on your feet and ask questions you make up. So the disadvantages are the interviewer involves closed questions, so that's like a yes or no answer. There's a risk of researcher bias, and there's not a very strong relationship between interviewers compared to in an unstructured interview. So an unstructured interview, this interview is very open, and the interviewer allows it to flow. So the advantages of an unstructured interview is you don't get closed answers from the person, so they might go in more depth with their answers and you might get more information. Also, you could get answers to personal questions which you wouldn't necessarily ask, but the person might open up to you. There also is a good relationship between the two. However, the disadvantages are you could get off topic of the interview. Also, you don't get enough information. Semi-structured, this is where you have a few questions written down which you want to ask, but could ask further questions on that topic. The advantages are you're more flexible in asking questions and you get less biased response. And the disadvantages are you can only get one opinion from the interview. So the last one is a focus group. This is a group-based interview where all the group chips in and all answer the questions together. And the advantages are you get a general idea of information from the group, more in-depth answers because you have discussions, and people might become more confident within a group, so more likely to open up. So the disadvantages of that are people could get shy within a group and not contribute a lot, and for the interviewer it could be hard to lead the group because they all might talk over each other and stuff like that. People could follow the group and just go along with their answer and not say their true feelings on the subject. So a questionnaire, you get open and closed questionnaires. Open questionnaires are qualitative data. This is where they express ideas, thoughts and opinions. They tend to be longer answers. Closed questions are quantitative data. They have a specific response and the answers are shorter and faster. There are many things to consider when creating a questionnaire, such as is it a sensitive topic, age, academic level, and length.